Bonjour, bonjour, mes amis. It's so delightful to be here with you. It's an evening for me. I venture some of you, it's midday, maybe even the morning, depending on where you're calling in from. And I know for Dr. Varden, I believe it's midday for you, correct?
3 p.m. Well,
Ah,
I'm
close.
after. Yes,
Depending on when you woke up and when you plan on going to bed, that could be midday.
yes.
And how are
And
you
the
doing
sun is
today?
out and it's warm, so I'm enjoying.
Yeah. Oh, I'm happy to hear that. And I'm happy to be here this evening chatting about what I hope to be doing in a few hours, and that is sleeping.
Yes, absolutely foundational. We talk about this and mention this so many times because it is.
It's so I wonder if that's where we start our conversation this evening. I like the rapport, the flow that you and I get into in the sense that we talk about why we care about things before we jump into the nuance of caring about them. So before we jumped on, we were talking about some of just the implications that sleep or lack thereof in particular have on people. So why don't we start off with the question of are people getting enough sleep? The instinctive answer is no, but
No.
give me some numbers around that no.
Well, when I was looking up some statistics,
Hmm.
there was a statistic from the CDC dated 2016, so
Hmm.
before all of the chaos of the pandemic. And at
Hmm.
that time, so almost 10 years ago,
Yeah.
1 in 3 adults in the US did
Oh,
not
yeah.
get enough sleep on a regular basis. So
Yeah.
I can only imagine what it is right now. And
Yeah.
then, you know, when you consider the fact that chronic sleep deprivation is associated with 36% increased risk of things like colorectal cancer, 48% increase of heart
Yeah.
disease. And
Yeah.
again, these were from studies, in like the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
So I could only imagine how much it has
Yeah.
increased since then,
Yeah.
with everything, all this
Our life child. Yeah.
stress that our,
Yeah.
bodies, that our society has gone through. And, with increased electromagnetic frequencies, with exposures to lights and computers and technologies. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of scary to think about.
It feels like this thing you can't like it's such a tricky thing I find to talk about with people because we know how profoundly important it is for good health. So for example, when I do a cardiovascular intake, so when I'm checking in on someone's heart health, right? Blood pressure, lipids, all the fun things, I will ask a person, how much are you sleeping and are you doing that consistently? Because independent of where their blood sugars are, where their blood fats are, where their blood pressure is at, sleep is an independent risk factor towards cardiovascular disease. So
Yeah.
take away everything else, it predicts that. And yet it's also this thing I appreciate most people coming to me, they're like, but how do I do it? The world is not set up for me to be sleeping, and I feel like I have to be counterculture in order
Right.
to achieve that. Yeah, which is such a difficult thing to balance.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I think I would say, even in the last 5 years, that sleep research has
Hmm.
really, just exploded, and the importance of sleep to good health. And I also think that there's at least starting to get a shift in societal mindset
Hmm.
of actually protecting sleep, having it be, important, to the
Mm.
point where it's like before, I've got so many friends, and I remember use that I used to think like this. It's like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I can, I will just push and push and push. And there,
Yeah.
to get all the things done. And there was
Yeah.
almost a moralistic stamp that was put on, oh, you don't need much sleep, oh, good for you. And it's just kind of like realizing now, again,
Hmm.
looking at, the studies, looking at all of this, it's just kind of like, if anything, that's more flipped. And I know personally that I am a bit more conscientious about
Mm.
protecting my sleep.
Yeah.
I put priority into that to make sure that
I love that.
of good quality sleep, and that's something we're going to jump into a little bit about
Yeah.
the how much sleep.
Well, I was just going to transition because I think you offered a good segue. I don't I remember, or at least I'm made aware of, like, I think especially the presidential era of Bill Clinton, right? Because he used to talk about very publicly, oh, I only sleep 4 hours, and to an extent that typified that generation, right? Of your comment about I'll sleep when I'm dead. There's too much to be done. I'd rather be doing than sleeping, right? And so that was always a battle with sleep doctors that were kind of tossing out this concept of 8 hours a night, 8 hours a night. From a genetic perspective, from a research perspective, where is science kind of sitting, at least right now, insofar as it's saying how much sleep do you truly need? Is 8 hours still kind of sitting at that sweet golden spot, or is there an element of personalization that some people maybe need less truly, or maybe some people need more?
Well, and see, there's the thing. When you do like the average, it is that like 7 to 9, but even like that 6 to 9. But they have found that when you have less than 6 hours sleep, uh,
Mm,
that's where real issues come. And I'm not saying for everybody, because some people can actually live and thrive and be okay
yeah.
with less than 6 hours. But I'll tell you, that percentage of people that can do that, very, very small.
Mhm.
Okay. But generally, yeah, that 7 to 9 hours.
Yeah.
I know personally, following my Oura ring, I've had it for 4.5 years now.
Yeah.
Um, that I actually, if I get good quality sleep, and I get really good sleep scores, I can do that within like 6.5 hours, but I generally like around that 7.5.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's typical, because I will
Mm.
say sleep deprivation leads to a 400% increase in the likelihood of depression.
Yeah.
Because I know mental health is something that we have touched on quite a bit in our
Yeah.
webinars, that we have tried to bring to light the importance of that it's
Yeah.
a moralistic failing. There are, biochemical
Yeah.
reasons. There are so many different reasons, sleep being one of them,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and the fact of like people with insomnia, it's like, "God, I'd love to sleep, but I just can't." And those
Yeah.
insomnia affects up to 30% of adults worldwide,
Yeah.
worldwide, with
Yeah.
10% of those experiencing chronic insomnia. And that's a recent study, I mean, recent enough, in 2020, from the
Yeah.
American Academy of Sleep Medicine.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a delight that keeps going up. So I wonder if we start shifting in some of the genes that personalize that number. And the one call it, the only thing I'd want to add to kind of your detailing, perfect detailing of how much sleep, is that there's new evidence, and I think it still needs to be further clarified and qualified, but there's a bit of emerging evidence that for females, in particular, females who are currently menstruating, so we're talking about those within their menstruating years. This doesn't necessarily apply to those who are peri or postmenopausal, but women in their menstruating years might actually need a bit more sleep than the 8 hours. Science was kind of like, research was kind of tossing around 9 to 10. But again, I think this is an element of it needs to be better studied. But I think it's an interesting thing that as we do science that teases out differences between sexes, right? That for females menstruating, likely a bit more sleep needed, in particular because the body does so much different work than the male body does.
And I think
Yeah.
any woman can agree to that without having to know all the studies. They're like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember at the same time when that research came out in parallel, and this was more from Pop Science. I couldn't actually find the original study, but on the Pop Science side of things, when you're going through your social media and you're seeing all these like sciencey headlines, in parallel to that study that came out that said women need more sleep, in parallel to that, there was a study that said, hey guys, if your girl gets an extra hour of sleep, she's going to want more sex. And effectively, the study said that more sleep equates to greater libido libido in women, right? And so again, I couldn't find
that is a great incentive for
for
the
all
guys to
parties.
let your woman have a little more sleep. I love it. I love
Yeah. So ladies, if you ever need that extra hour in the morning, just I mean, I don't think sex should ever be a bartering chip, but here we are. Get that extra hour, girl. And then enjoy the hour after that. Let us jump into some genes. Before we do that, I wonder if we can take a quick look at the poll. So for those that are frequent offenders, just like Dr. Barden and I are frequent offenders, we like to know what you want to hear about. So we try to take a poll to figure out the pulse of our audience and where we are especially going to be focusing some of our thoughts and details. The first question we asked is, how would you describe your current sleep quality? Mon Dieu, 75% of our audience says they wake up frequently during the evening, right? So meaning they're not getting that full together. And I would also offer, and please toss this in the chat, does waking up mean you kind of like are aware you're awake and then fall back asleep? Or is this like a true wake up and it takes some time, a beat, if you will, before you're back asleep? Another 50% of our audience, this was, you could have multiple choice, feels tired when they're waking up. So our audience is really reflective of some of these sleep stats that we're reading or that you're offering and sharing. We asked the question of, are you aware that DNA influences how well you can sleep? Um, Interesting. It's a bit of a mixed bag. There was almost equal responding between yes, no, and I suspected, but I don't really know the detail. So I think as part of the Glasses crew here, Dr. Varden and I are going to have a lot of fun explaining the genes behind that, helping you understand some of the science behind that. Yeah. The next question we asked is, do you know your natural chronotype? So chronotype really being, are you a night owl? Are you a morning bird? And Dr. Varden was educating me as to there's better differentiators between just being birds, but we'll stick to birds for today. Um, 43% of our audience, oh mon Dieu, early birds. 25% of the audience is like me, hardcore night owls. 17% is not sure. And then another really honest 15%, and I value, say, I'm not really sure. It depends on the day. Yeah. Dr. Varden, what are you?
that's such a great question because
Ooh.
when I was in university and doing that type of thing, I was more of a night owl.
Mm,
Just when everything was quiet and I was able to get studying done and focus. But when I allow my body to be in a natural rhythm, no major stresses, no deadlines, no papers or
mhm.
exams to study for, all this other stuff, not having a lot of blue light exposure and all that stuff,
Yeah.
I actually find that I'm more of the normal rising when the sun comes up,
Yeah.
going to bed when it's dark, even if those times, like the time changes, like during the seasons, you know.
Yeah.
So my body will naturally fall
Interesting.
into the regular
Yeah.
cycle of the sun.
Yeah.
It's really wild. And one of the ways that you can tell is if when you go to sleep and you wake up without an alarm clock, when does your body naturally wake up?
Yeah.
And actually, I find that I naturally wake up sometime between 6 and 7 a.m. just naturally. Do you know that? And
Look at you.
it's funny because the last, I would say, couple years of grad school, you'd think
Yeah.
would be the craziest time, especially during writing your dissertation and
Yeah.
all this stuff. I didn't use an alarm clock, and I
Oh
would
dear. Look at you.
naturally wake up
Wow.
and get going. But I made more of an effort to make sure
Mm,
I got sleep. I didn't pull all
yeah.
nighters, for studying and all that, and that made a huge difference.
Hmm. Yeah.
Huge.
And I think that'll be really important when we talk through what can you do about your sleep, because I think there's some interesting research that talks about consistency of sleep necessarily than quantity of sleep. But let's dive into the genes. Let me just finish up these poll questions. So yes, how many caffeine addicts do we have out there? Sorry, come on, you need to scoop. And then someone's saying so we asked the question of how sensitive to caffeine. Most of our audience, myself included, avoids it afternoon, where we have 30% blessed, not consuming caffeine at all, and then 13% saying incredibly sensitive. The last question we asked, what are you most interested in when it comes to sleep optimization? So we'll take this and focus our conversations on it. 30% is saying staying asleep longer, right? Which really echoes that I wake up often. And then 20% also speaking to waking up energized or understanding genetic profile, and then about a quarter of the audience looking just to improve performance and recovery through sleep. So really optimizing what sleep is intended to be, right? That really intensive time of repair and healing within the body. All right. So, to the people that are calling on us spectacle girls, why don't we start diving into the genes? So, the most obvious gene, the one that is named in a very intuitive way, Dr. Varden, would you like to talk to us about clock? I wonder
Yes,
what it
the
does.
clock gene. The clock gene helps to regulate circadian rhythms. And yes,
Mhm.
every cell in our body, every organ, all the tissues, they have they work off of that clock gene of the circadian rhythm. It is so immensely eloquent and amazing. And if someone like myself who has a variant that is dysregulated, so
Yeah.
the T would be optimal, the C allele would actually be a dysregulation in that gene. And I happen to have the heterozygous, a CT. But what that does is it causes dysregulation in that sleep-wake cycle. People can
Mhm.
be more prone to insomnia. They could have delayed sleep phase disorders, or, I mean, not saying that you definitely will if you have this, it's just that you can be more prone,
Yeah.
due to other aspects that are going on.
Mhm.
I've got it, but yet I sleep fine. I get crowns on my on my sleep scores as long as
Yeah.
don't have alcohol. I don't eat too late.
Well, I
Work
think
sleep hygiene, but
yeah. So clock is really for the audience's awareness, I think it's important. Clock's really important kind of kicking off the day. And a lot of people need to start linking the kickoff of the day to the continuation of sleep. I think very much of sleep, and Dr. Varden, I know you agree, sleep is a 24-hour process, right? The moment we wake up is really indicating how our quality of sleep is going to be that evening, right? And so clock is this gene that really says, A, you have an easier time of establishing that rhythm, but separate to that easier time, there's a bit more resilience and robustness if anything hiccups come throughout the day, right? So for example, I talk to people, so Dr. Varden, you just shared your status is a heterozygous, so it's a mix. You have one allele that gives you a bit of an Achilles heel, right? And so the statement is, can you establish that? Obviously, yes. But if you travel, are you more sensitive to that jet lag? Are you? Yeah.
actually, I used to be.
Okay.
And I start implementing, these biohacking tools. And I mean, it doesn't even have to be a device per se.
Yeah.
Biohacking tool in grounding.
Mm,
As soon as, like, off the plane, at my location, I will get barefoot on the
mm,
ground
okay.
and I will, ground myself to that area.
So
And
giving other cues. Yeah.
yes, I mean, because this is what our bodies do. You can do very
Yeah.
low tech, free things. Um,
Hmm.
and also just kind of shifting, the times that I eat,
Mm,
making sure that within, 10 minutes or so of getting up, I get the sunlight in my eyes, because that will trigger
mm,
because we actually have cells in our eyes that will trigger the brain to go, okay, so this is the circadian rhythm we have to work on, and your body will adjust,
mm.
because good night's sleep, like you said, starts in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We have
So if
to,
I'm hearing you, it's not so much that you can't, it's just that you're almost having to reinforce body with several other cues in order to reestablish that circadian rhythm, which in you is a little bit more tenuous of consequence too.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So clock is that first one. I think clock also speaks a little bit to chronotype, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So chronotype, we have people spoke to this already, but we have our morning birds and our night owls, right? And so chronotype to an extent, there's other genes that are considered in this, but can be influenced by your clock, right? So kind of the comment is if you have that more deleterious C allele, you're more likely, like myself, a night owl compared to someone with TT who might be more naturally and happily a morning bird, right?
Yeah, I mean, and this is where breaking it down, at least the research that I have read over the last, decade, that it really breaks it down even more, talking about different chronotypes, because not just the morning bird, or that, the morning type, the early risers, people who are
Mhm.
most alert, productive in the morning,
Yeah.
they tend to get up early, go to bed early. Uh, that often is associated with that more regulated clock gene, people who regulate
Yeah.
their cortisol release,
Hmm.
melatonin suppression much more efficiently. And that, the clock gene works into that. Now,
Hmm.
they may struggle with jet lag, you know, depending on, or I would say social jet lag, meaning that, if they went to a party and stayed up late
Hmm.
and went off of their normal rhythm, that would throw them off some.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about, so I would suspect you are aligning more with the evening type, like the night owl, correct? Is
Oh,
that
yes, ma'am.
so? So for people, for our audience, this is where night owls feel most energetic and productive in the evening, preferring
Hmm.
late bedtimes,
Yeah.
waking later in the morning. And this often is linked to genetic polymorphisms in the cry gene, CRY1, which delays circadian rhythms, resulting in that later melatonin release, because it
Hmm.
this beautiful dance with these neurotransmitters, with the hormones, when we're talking about cortisol and melatonin,
Hmm.
serotonin, and all of these things. But there are some others, that kind of work in there that are a bit, in between, delayed, or that can fluctuate. But even then, um, oftentimes, I think that our sleep chronotypes are perturbed due to society,
Mm.
our station is, the kind of work that we're doing, if we're doing swing shift or night work.
So
Um,
yeah, yeah,
if you have to do work on a computer late, I mean, that is going to affect
yeah.
natural chronotype.
I think for the audience, what Dr. Varden is getting at is within academia, within medical science, there's a bit of a debate. Does chronotype even exist? So I saw Diana ask the question, what is chronotype? And so chronotype is this idea of, does a person have natural inborn often meaning genetic tendencies, right, towards a certain energy pattern that Dr. Varden just detailed. So the morning person, right? They're a little bit more inclined to wake up a bit earlier, and their first bursts of energy, their most productive, thoughtful times of the day, are going to be those early morning hours, whereas the day continues, that dissipates a bit and it becomes a bit more restful compared to the proverbial night owl, that late night person. That burst of energy, that burst of focus doesn't happen until later in the evening, right? So they're the people that are a little more naturally inclined to be staying up. But what Dr. Barden's getting at, and I think this is a really powerful piece, and she lives and breathes this, especially saying, I have a suboptimal clock, but I'm able to have a great circadian rhythm. If you're able to fashion an environment around you in a way that supports you, you can have a great circadian rhythm just like if you have beautiful genes, but you're a shift worker, right? Just like that would also mean that, you know, you're going to have a dysregulated circadian rhythm, not because per se of your genes, but more that environment. So I think you're really highlighting, or at least through chronotypes, this is why there's a bit of debate in science, because there can be such influence from the environment. But from a genetic perspective, to the two genes that Dr. Barton has spoken to, clock and cry1, those can both speak to how easy is it for you to wake up, how easy is it for you to fall asleep, and between the two combinations there can really set you up to be a morning bird or a night owl. Whereas like, I mean, I'll speak from my own experience, you know, in the working world where, you know, I need to be awake in the morning in theory, I can conform and eventually I'll get comfortable with it, but give me vacation and my ability to do whatever I want. I'm not going to bed until 4 in the morning and then I will happily wake up at noon. So it's chicken and egg, right? We can conform until we don't have to.
But I'll tell you, there have been wonderful research studies and even anecdotal evidence in clinical practice where if someone is able to really, first of all, know what their chronotype is, know
Yeah.
when they are most productive,
Mm-hmm.
to see if they can align work with their chronotype or you know, align their, you know, because you don't really necessarily want to try to align your sleep with the work, because you tend to not be as productive. Where if you can get a job, even if you come in an hour or two later, they have found that productivity increases dramatically. I forgot the exact percentage.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of sick calls went down as well.
Yeah.
You know, so it's understanding, you know, how do our bodies work, how do we perform best, and then fit our environment and lifestyles best
Yeah.
as we can to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 I love that. So let's dive into a few other genes that we have here. And Alicia, I'm not sure if I have that right. You're asking some questions around what are nutritional recommendations. We're gonna dip into that once we get a little bit past the genes, but we can definitely speak to some thoughts and strategies around food. Because I think there's a few thoughts there, right? And again, there's an element of it depends on your genes. So we'll get to that. So Dr. Wren, what genes do you want to talk about next when it comes to genes that have a lot of influence on sleep? Do you want to start talking about the most socially acceptable drug in the world?
Caffeine.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
So
ma'am.
yeah, we're talking about the CYP1A2 gene, CYP1A2. Yeah, that's how quickly, efficiently does your body metabolize caffeine?
Yeah.
And you know, I happen to be a fast caffeine metabolizer. And I mean,
Hmm.
the thing is, it's like when when our bodies, first of all, are getting tired. Okay, so let's go with you know, top of the morning. Okay, so our ATP stores up and ready. We've got, you know, that initial cortisol boost, and we're
Happy.
woof, let's go. I mean, whether it's morning or afternoon for those night owls, you know, and you're up and going. As the day wears on, we get adenosine buildup. And
Hmm.
adenosine, this actually works into adenosine triphosphate, ATP, energy molecule of the cell. Well, when a phosphate molecule breaks off, it's releasing energy. That's what it does. That's how we get the energy. And with each phosphate molecule that breaks off, energy is given off. Well, you end up with an adenosine molecule. And adenosine builds up during our wakefulness period. And that creates a sleep pressure.
Yeah.
And caffeine, when we drink caffeine, it blocks the adenosine receptor.
Hmm.
But obviously, as many people had noted, that it can disrupt sleep if it's consumed too late in the day, especially if someone has a slower metabolism of caffeine.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
it's not like caffeine gives us the energy, it's that it's blocking the adenosine receptor so we don't feel that sleep pressure as much.
Yeah. And to give a little bit of context to what Dr. Varden's saying when she's saying metabolizing or getting rid of that caffeine, right? When you take this caffeine, your body considers it a drug, right? It goes into the brain, it will displace the adenosine and it's processed within the liver. And the question is, if you drink that cup of coffee, and let's just say it has 40 milligrams of caffeine, whatever that might be, right? The question is, how long does it take you to get rid of that 40 milligrams, right? And the half-life for most people, and this is what CYP1A2 will curate, the half-life can range from 4 hours to 8 hours. Half-life, meaning how long does it take you to get from 40 milligrams down to 20? So some people with the quick CYP1A2, like the Dr. Vardens of the world, right, might only take them 4 hours to split that in half, meaning 8 hours later, you're close to 20 and almost negligible, something that you can manage amount, right? Whereas if you're someone with a slower CYP1A2, 1A2, you're at that 8 hour point, right? That means it's going to take you about 16 hours to do what Dr. Varden was able to do in 8. So this is where that caffeine sensitivity can come in, right? So knowing how quickly you process it, because if you have a cup in the morning and you're still processing that at 8 at night, right? That's something that you might need to bring into consideration of shifting, that cup of coffee maybe to green tea or something, just based on, like, body will habituate a little bit to it. Habituate meaning get used to it. If you do 40 milligrams every single day, it won't necessarily have the same impact, right? That said, it still doesn't mean it goes away. You're still ingesting that. It's still going to have that competition within the brain for some of your sleepy molecules. Yeah. So something to be thinking through. Yeah. So, Dr. Varden, is there another gene that we would like, or that you would like us to focus on before we start diving into well, what can you do about all this? Now that you know it, what can you do about it? Do you want to, what's your preference? Dealer's choice between BDNF
Oh,
and 5-HTP.
honestly, I was going to say both because they're
Let's do it.
are very important when it comes to the
Yeah.
issues that the people, our audience, are dealing with.
Yeah.
When they're saying about, that they wake up a lot throughout the night, can't get
Yeah.
back to sleep. Both of these play such an
Yeah.
impactful part in that.
Yeah.
And this is where, okay, so first of all, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This controls how your body regulates your circadian rhythm. And, it's generally associated, with neuroplasticity, influences how your brain responds to sleep deprivation. So yeah, this is really important because just like we've been talking about, a good night's sleep begins in the morning when you
Mhm.
get sunlight on your face. Okay. Oh, by the way, I saw in the chat, was it Jeannie or Janine or somebody? There we go. Jeannie, she said, how do people usually get up and attain that, 10 minutes of
Yeah.
sun when you have to get dressed, go to the bathroom? And well, that's why I said, like within that, 10, 15
I
minutes,
I
like
think I
go to
think
the
it's been
bathroom
proven
first.
to be about 60 minutes. I think if it's
Yeah.
within 60 minutes of waking, as long as you get that dose of sunshine.
Yeah. And actually it was more like just kind of getting that,
Yeah.
5, 10 minutes. But yeah, I usually have to go to the bathroom first too. But it at my house, in Vermont, I if you have to just the window, get the light from the window. It's not like you necessarily have to go outside, especially if it's 20 below in the winter. Get some sun. But, like here in Arizona, I have a sliding glass door right outside my bedroom. And it's like, go to the bathroom, do that, and then step outside and just breathe the air,
Mm.
just get sunlight in my face, do some deep breathing, start my day.
Mhm.
Even if it's just for 5 minutes, just something to kind of set the intention, to get
Mm.
cortisol levels, to set everything up. you know
Mhm.
that is much better than having an alarm going off and you jumping out of bed and wah, going crazy. I mean, how would you want
Yeah.
to start your day?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
And
really important. Go ahead. You
oh, I was just going to say, Vicky is asking the question of how long. And so there's an element, it depends on, oh, we answer. Well, I'll still offer this. It depends on the quality of light. So if you're in a space where the sun is shining through and it's without clouds, right? That's 5 to 10 minutes. The moment there's clouds or something that's obstructing the sun, you're probably sitting closer to 15, depending on the amount of cloud coverage.
Right.
All right.
But either way, even if cloud cover is there, you're still getting photons from the sun. It's still light
Mhm.
up. So do take what you can get, do what you can, you
Yeah.
know. But BDNF is also important when it comes to getting to sleep,
Mhm.
because dysregulation, even if you have a GG presentation, that is considered optimal, okay, for that neuroplasticity. If you have a GG phenotype for your TPH2, you could have an epistatic effect where it makes BDNF act suboptimally. And this is also something that I happen to have. So I'm very aware of it. And I've had many clients like this where what ends up happening, how that can equate to affecting your sleep, is that it can cause you to ruminate. It's like when you lay down in bed and all of a sudden your brain will not shut up. And it's like you're thinking, oh gosh, did I send that email? Oh, did I turn the oven off? Oh, oh, that
Yeah.
argument that I had, and you start running it through your mind, and it's just hard to shut it down. So again, there's ways and techniques that you can do that. And it can affect when you wake up through the night, that chatter can start, going on where it can be hard to fall back asleep because you can't turn it off. So that is very impactful for BDNF. Is there anything you wanted to add to that before we jump into the 5-HTTLPR? Because that's it.
Yeah, I think for BDNF, like I think most people on this webinar probably have heard of the ideas of sleep hygiene, right? Cool bedroom, all these sorts of things that you can do to keep your sleeping environment very clean and supportive of sleep. And what Dr. Vard and I have been discussing, and we haven't explicitly named it, is very much light hygiene, right? This idea that first thing in the morning, there should be like direct exposure of eyes, i.e., if you're 4 eyes, take off a set of your eyes, right? Direct exposure to light. But the other concept of light hygiene is also as the day goes on, are you removing certain light stimuli being blue light? Okay. And the reason I'm pausing here on light hygiene is she's saying, hey, can we transition in between genes? Is because I find people with a suboptimal BDNF clinically tend to struggle a lot more with sleep and sleep delays if they're exposing themselves to blue light later in the day. They just tend to be a lot more sensitive to this. So think of blue light, especially later on in the day, right? We've talked about sleep starts in the morning. The morning is when you kind of kick off this beautiful symphony of hormones that eventually is going to get you to sleep. But when you're exposing yourself to blue light, in particular, 4-ish, give or take hours before you're going to bed, what you're effectively doing is telling your brain, hey, the sun's out. And it almost re-kicks off some of that symphony. So if you think about, you start a symphony, but then you're like, wait a minute, remix, you get a DJ there, and then they toss in another symphony, all you're going to be is like, that's two. I'm not really sure what to do. And what happens in the body is like, we're confused by this music. We're not going to go to sleep. Right. So especially those with poor BDNF, be very gentle and careful with your light exposure. For those that are Puritans, this might mean completely eliminating screens for several hours before bed. For those that need to compromise or life, does not allow for such, that could be getting blue light blocking glasses. There's a few other things, but I would say if you know your BDNF presentation, right, the actual gene and then the epistatic impact with TPH2, our reports will tell you both. Then if you're suboptimal, you really want to be considering light hygiene because that's going to be so very impactful to you, to your ability to fall asleep and to your ability to maintain sleep. All right, Dr. Varn,
I
all yours and the
love,
joy that is 5-HTT-LPR.
I love that you bring up the music the way you do, especially because I know you love rap.
So this is a tangent. One of the best concerts I have been to was classically trained violinist who was on a stage with a rap DJ. So it was someone mixing records and then this guy doing like classical music atop it. It was absolutely brilliant. I see no conflict between them. So
That's
beautiful.
awesome.
We need to reorient, or else I'll go down a rabbit hole of excitement and joy.
Okay. So let's hop into the 5-HT-TLPR. So this is the serotonin transporter gene, and it affects, obviously, serotonin transport, and that plays a role in sleep regulation, particularly REM sleep. And really, it can influence the sleep architecture and emotional processing during sleep. But it's also something that it helps and can affect how well you prioritize incoming stimuli in wakefulness and during sleep, because you tend, if for someone like myself, I'm telling you, I get I get the cards, of the challenges, which makes me really work toward that, biohacking and really, putting in that extra effort to optimize. So people with an LL, which means that it's long, that is what we consider the wild type. I am not going to necessarily say optimal, good or bad, because it just is, because
Yeah.
there are actually beneficial and some challenges with each presentation. So
Hmm.
opposite to the long is the short, so an S. So you can have an LL, LS, or an SS. If you have an S variant in there, it's not an allele because it's not a single nucleotide polymorphism. It's the length of the gene itself. If you have a shorter presentation, that would mean that you have a more difficult time prioritizing incoming stimuli. So it's like everything is important.
Hmm.
And I happen to have two S's. But the good thing, and this is where having it be a superpower, is
Hmm.
that I pay attention to detail. I catch
Mm.
every little thing that a lot of
Yes,
people
ma'am.
miss. You know,
Everything that I drop, she catches.
that's why we work so well together. So the thing is, the challenge to that is that uh, it's when I'm sleeping, little noises, like the hum of a chest freezer or refrigerator going on. My body is so attuned to that, considered a light sleeper.
Hmm.
I'll wake up thinking, well, what's that?
Yeah.
Is it time to wake up? If there's any light coming in the room,
Hmm.
time to wake up, sound,
Hmm.
or I mean, even uh, sensations, the blanket being pulled over my arm, or, one of my dogs jumping on the bed. Okay. That would be more apt to wake me up than someone like Dr. Krista.
Hmm.
So this is even more so that sleep hygiene, that implementing things like a dark room. Of course, I travel a lot, so I have a sleep mask that I use all the time. So, maybe using a white noise or a pink noise machine to drown out
Hmm.
some of those background noises that would more easily wake me up.
Yeah.
So, but that, if you are dysregulated, that is where those people who said this, look at your reports. More than likely, you have at least one S, in your 5-HTT-LPR if you are waking up constantly throughout the night. Not
Yeah.
saying that that is the only thing, because it may not be. There are other things going on, but we're
Yeah.
specifically talking about genetics, that this is a
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm seeing already, like I'm doing, as you were chatting, I was looking quickly through some of the questions that have been coming in, and it's a huge concern within the audience. I'm waking up at how do I stay asleep, right? And there's so many different things, and we'll slowly go through this as we do questions and answers, but for females in particular, there's the question of how much progesterone and where in your cycles in terms of the monthly cycle or the lifetime cycle are you sitting? There's other questions of GABA, right? We don't really have genes per se that peer into GABA, but GABA is one of the bigger things that gives that our brain the sense of calm and suppresses that waking up tendency, right? And so there could be dysregulation there. There's so many different avenues. So I think it's wise we transition into questions so we can really start tackling some of this. But one thing I'd really encourage people is that we're going to go through some really strong stuff, but remember that there's so much that needs to be personalized here. We haven't mentioned GABA, we haven't really mentioned hormones or anything like that, but all this is important. So if you're really struggling with sleep, make sure you're checking in with your healthcare provider. And if you want someone in particular that can support you through that functional and the genetic lens, please do reach out to us because we'd love to be of service and support because we know your genes. And then that gives us a bit of a more targeted way of where to start with some of the sleep hygiene and sleep tactics. Cool. All right. So, Dr. Varden, our first question is coming in from Elizabeth. And it's such a beautiful question because it captures everything that people want to know. Elizabeth is asking, how can I stay asleep through the night? So, my first question, at least, Elizabeth, given that's a female presenting name, is where are you in your cycle and are you close to peri or menopause, right? Because that at least would be one of the first places I would start, right? Dr. Varden, do you want to talk about progesterone, how it hugs the body at night? That's how I describe progesterone to people. It's like a hug.
um, yeah, I mean, with progesterone, that being one of our sex hormones, um, this it's a calming hormone. It helps, and I love how you say that. It's like a hug. Yes,
Yeah.
it helps to trigger, in the brain, in the body, that relaxation. Um,
Mhm.
you know, so the thing is that I still would be interested in um other aspects,
Mm.
like as far as blood sugar,
Love it. Yeah.
cortisol spikes. I think the progesterone um, is really important because, especially staying asleep, I mean, because it is considered the relaxation hormone for very good reason. And
Mhm.
like you've already said, with the GABA activation, it does enhance GABA. And people are probably wondering, like, what's GABA? This is the primary calming neurotransmitter. It's actually the opposite to glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter, really promoting that deeper, more restorative sleep.
Mhm.
It also helps to buffer stress response,
Mhm.
and especially if it's spiking at night. So honestly, it makes me want to ask so many more
Yeah.
questions. Um,
But I think we got two good chunks for at least Elizabeth to kind of peer into, right? This idea of where you sit in your hormonal life, and
right.
then separate to that, where is some of your metabolic control, right? Because you've just beautifully articulated that if your blood sugars aren't steady and stable, right, that spiking or subsequent dropping often can wake a person.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you go hypoglycemic, which means, low blood sugar, that triggers the cortisol and adrenaline.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
mean, even if the progesterone is there, if you are still hypoglycemic, you could still be waking up.
yeah,
And things that I've had clients do is maybe have a little bit of protein, or a healthy snack before bedtime.
yeah, yeah,
That can give them just enough to stabilize their blood sugar to help them.
yeah,
But I mean, there's just so many reasons why one would be waking up. And,
yeah,
this is where working with a practitioner comes in.
yeah.
Oh,
I'll tend to, in particular, for some of my poor serotonin folk, meaning LS or SS, I'll also encourage that snack. It needs to be small. You want to be focused on sleep, not digestion. But if you are taking a pre-bedtime snack, either to stabilize blood sugars or separate to that, a little bit of carbs will also trigger the creation of serotonin, melatonin, kind of that cascade, which can, for many people, help sustain sleep over the night. So if you're struggling with sleep over the night, one thing you can play with, right? You ideally want to stop eating about 3 to 4 hours before bed. You don't want to go to bed on a full tummy. But an hour or so before bed, you can play with having a small snack, right? So Dr. Varden's a little more partial to protein. I tend to recommend like half a banana mixed with some almond butter, so you get some fat and some carbs in there. And that for many people can kind of help them get through the night. It gives you a little happy boost of serotonin, which is another thing that will hug you and calm you down. And then it will stabilize that fat. That almond butter will help stabilize blood sugars through the night.
And I will say it's not that I have a preference over protein.
Okay.
It really is determinant on the person
Yeah.
sitting in front of me, because I have gone,
Agreed.
all kinds of ways. And I mean, and even with some protein, you still need some fat. And I love, like the almond butter. Yeah, another one that I had found that worked well if I go more toward the carb, doing more of a resistant starch of rice that has been cooled and reheated, that was made with like coconut oil. So you have the fat, and then with a little bit of honey, to
Oh.
give that glucose, manuka, or, some raw honey from a local apiary. So you get the added benefits of that,
Mhm.
again, not too much, just a little bit, but
Mm.
really between, your three macros, it depends on who's sitting in front of me, which way I lean.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's it's not to tell people, oh, we have nothing to tell you, go see a doctor. It's really to say with sleep, because there's so many things that contribute to it.
Yeah.
It's really important to get a good, thorough workup from a provider who can say, hey, your issue is inflammation. Hey, your issue is sleep hygiene. Hey, your issue is blood sugar, right? We're kind of stabbing in the dark when we get such general questions, but it's fun. So hopefully, Elizabeth, that was helpful. And I forget the person's name who asked around eating, but hopefully that helps a little bit when it comes to food that supports sleep. Yeah. Okay, so Deborah is asking, can you please speak about perimenopause and sleep? At 53, I've only recently begun to sleep 4 to 5 hours, so I would imagine that's down a little bit. So I'm gonna come back a little bit to progesterone here, and just as well, I would say kind of the chaos that your hormones are going through. So perimenopause really speaks to body is thinking about menopause. Menopause being that we are no longer going to be bleeding in a cyclic manner. We're going to stop that cycle, right? And so you're going to ebb and flow through these hormones. When you hit perimenopause, that kind of consistent, happy up and down of that 28-day cycle that you probably knew through most of your 20s and 30s goes away. It gets a lot more choppy. It gets a lot more static because sometimes there won't be enough of something. Another hormone will try and compensate. And so that up and down, that general decline of estrogen and therefore general decline of progesterone kind of creates a bit of muck in the body. Okay. So one thing you might want to do is look at hormone testing. Where are you in relation to that? Where is that? And oftentimes, while I don't think it's the only solution, oftentimes I find for females, a good BHRT prescription will be incredibly profoundly helpful. And part of that is going to be an oral progesterone, right? So when you take that oral progesterone, part of the way it's broken down will actually encourage some sleep. So oftentimes, if you're really struggling and that is the motivation for your BHRT, they'll time some of that progesterone later in the day so that it does support sleep. But that would be one of the first places I would stop, or sorry, start. So close. And so if you're looking for that sort of support, we can be there, because I think as well, knowing your genes for that and what hormone prescription is going to be appropriate is very helpful there. I hope that was helpful to you, Deborah, and I wish you the best as you transition, because I know I understand the other side of that is so wonderful. So it's delightful to hear women as they go through that. Jeanette has a question for us. What um
So
just
basically saying,
yeah, perfect,
what if
thank
you
you.
go to work in the dark and work inside all day? So
Do you
that's
work
how
inside
do
of a
you get,
box?
yeah, basically a box.
Yeah.
And she's like, how do you get sun within that 10 minutes of
Yeah.
rising, or that first hour of rising? Because for years, she's been taking Ambien,
Mm.
clonazepam, trazodone to get
Oh,
sleep. And she wakes up at 3 a.m. every night, and she only averages about 4 to 4.5 hours of sleep per night. Jeanette, I got to tell you, I mm, I sympathize for you. That is rough.
yeah.
And thank you so much for sharing that. So, really, what you want to do, this is the genesis of biohacking. That, if this is going to be your reality of your job, for one, I'd say see if you can find something that works in your lifetime, or that works best to optimize your life, your health, your joy. But putting that aside, if you stay in the routine that you are right now, things that you can look into, something Dr. Krista had mentioned earlier about getting that, mimicking morning sunlight,
Mhm.
using something that will give you light. For example, using like a 10,000 lux light therapy box upon waking. They have these devices that, 10,000 lux, that's the measurement for light. And it has full spectrum light, and shining that, in your direction. You sit about, like a foot and a half away from it, 12 to 18 inches for about 10 to 15 minutes. You don't You look toward it, not directly into it. That helps to stimulate those, the cells in the eyes, the what they call the melanopsin receptors in your eyes, that tells your brain it's daytime. That's what I was talking about earlier. And you do this even if you don't feel sleepy yet, because what it does is it anchors into your circadian rhythm. So it is very important. You don't wear glasses or sunglasses when you're doing this. Okay. It's got to be the naked eye exposure, to help get that rhythm, like what Dr. Krista was saying, that when you're outside, take your glasses off. So, there are some wonderful brands that you can take a look at, but that's going to be huge. You really need to work with the natural light rhythm.
Yeah.
Um, when it comes to long-term sleep medication use, that's something you're going to have to talk to your doctor about,
Yeah.
the prescribing doctor.
Yeah.
Um, but, you know, that's something that you know, that's disruptive to the
Yeah.
rhythm, but, you know,
Yeah, yeah, it's I think we'd have to know so much more intimate detail about your case because I think for some people those agents are a godsend and truly the only way through, especially stressful times and not sleeping for a while can be very stressful, can be that supportive agent. But there's always that hope, right? Of maybe we can shift something. So while you're leveraging that, while you have the rest that those afford, reconstructing life in a way that supports sleep, which is I think where Dr. Varden's going with all these beautiful light interventions, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I would
So
say just shifting the light exposure and eating aspects, because when you start throwing
mhm,
off your circadian rhythm and you're not sleeping well, guess what else gets shifted? The
yeah,
hormones that regulate food, hunger, ghrelin
yeah,
and leptin, and we tend to not choose the best, healthiest foods when we
yeah,
haven't slept that well.
yeah,
Cortisol levels are off and we tend to gain weight more. It's harder to
yeah.
get that off. So, regulating blood sugar, helping with the light, that will go a long way.
And yeah, yeah. And I think when you speak to the 4 or 5 hours, right, there's an element of let's talk to your practitioner, let's see what we can do. But also if truly where your body's set point is, 4 or 5, 4.5 hours, there's research that says so long as you're consistent in that. So if you're always going to bed at midnight, not always getting up at 4, that will beget more health than kind of a shifting window of those 4 hours. So if there's an element of you can't extend that sleep window, really, really, really focus on the consistency. And I want the whole audience to hear this. I know we've been speaking to Jeanette for a little bit, but for those that struggle with sleep, one of the best things you can do in regards to returning to a sleep schedule, but very separate to that, support your health. We scared you with all the, if you don't sleep, this is what happens, you're gonna die, right? The focus on the consistency. That is one of the strongest and best things you can do to returning to sleep. But separate to that, supporting health outcome measures, because again, think of that symphony. The moment you wake up, you're kicking off not only your sleep, but to Dr. Varden's point, appetite hormones, mood hormones, you're kicking off so much. So if you're able to always be consistent on that and your body can rely on that consistency, it then can conspire, if you will, to ensuring it optimizes other systems so that maybe while you're not sleeping a lot, it's really going to go gung-ho at all that cleaning up and that detox, right? So that would be my thought. And Jeanette, sorry, I hope that's helpful. And if you want to reach out, we're happy to chat with you more and see if we can offer better support. Cool. I'll quickly grab the next one from Marianne. Yeah, so Marianne's asking, so at the beginning of this, we talked a little bit about the Cry1 gene because that tends to be where clock is the curator of how easy it is to kind of come into the world from sleep. Cry1's a little bit of its dance partner and that it helps you fall asleep. It's a gene that if you have your DNA Way app, we plan on releasing within that app. Okay, so for those that do have their testing with us, I'd really encourage the powers that be can toss this into the chat, get our app, okay? And in the coming weeks, months, we will be releasing that gene so that you can see your presentation of it and how that will be influencing the ease with which you can fall asleep there. All right. Dr. Varden, Heidi is asking a question here. What do you do when you wake up at 3? Sounds like you might want to call this audience. A lot of people in our audience are waking up at 3, and it feels like it's time to get up. So you kind of, it sounds like, and I'll put words in her mouth here, a little bit of a cortisol spike. You're sleeping. All of a sudden it's 3 a.m. and you're getting this jolt that you would only really expect if you were waking up at a later time.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you that the sleep cycles, they consist of REM and non-REM stages, okay? Rapid eye movement, and then the non-rapid eye movement, which includes deep sleep. So waking up at 3 a.m. may occur during a lighter sleep phase in your sleep architecture that's being disruptive, or disrupted, I should say. And so things that you could do, this would be avoiding bright light, things that we've been talking about. That bright light exposure can signal your brain that it's morning, further disrupting the melatonin production. If you need to have any kind of light, use a dim red light spectrum lighting. If you have to get up and urinate, or I'd say what's going on when you wake up? Are you having to urinate all the time, or you're just waking up and you're just like, okay, I'm awake. What do I do now? That type of thing. I know that if you can't fall asleep within about 20 minutes, if you can't fall back asleep, to actually leave the bed and go onto a couch, not turn on the TV, not be turning on bright lights, keeping a red light or just keeping it dark, but actually physically go somewhere else, because your brain will start thinking that, oh, bed is not just for sleeping. Bed should be for sleeping and sex. That's it. Other than that, that's why I tell my clients, don't have a TV in your bedroom. Don't be sitting in your bed watching TV or having a meal and doing this. No, I mean, because our bodies, that basic part of our brain starts relating the bed to being, okay, I should be awake here too. So we want to train the brain that way. But you can also try some yoga nidra. There's a practice, it's a non-sleep deep rest, NSDR. Yoga nidra is one where it's some deep breathing, some almost like falling asleep, but you're not actually asleep. But it really helps to calm your nervous system, replenish those dopamine reserves, getting into that parasympathetic state, because a lot of times when you're waking up at 3 o'clock, you get a cortisol spike. So we need to calm that down. So doing some breath work, some slow diaphragmatic breathing, inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 7, exhaling for 8. Basically, what you want to do is you want to exhale longer than you inhale. That's what actually triggers that parasympathetic state. And that helps to reduce that alertness. Please resist the urge to check your phone or any mentally stimulating tasks. Those can trigger more release of cortisol. And then of course, working through like some sleep hygiene of starting first thing in the morning, light exposure, light restriction in the evening, temperature regulation, foods, and then if you're getting too warm, because I know a lot of people, especially perimenopausal women, starting to get warmer, like night sweats or, hot flashes or whatever. Even if you're not, if you tend to warm up at night, warming up wakes you up. So you could even get like a cool mattress cover, like Sleep 8. There's a few of them. I have no affiliation to any of them. These are just ones that clients of mine have used and really like. So I do want to say, because I think this is important, since we were talking about temperature, body temperature. First of all, our bodies need the core body temperature needs to drop 1 to 3 degrees in order for us to really get to sleep and stay asleep. So things to remember, these cute little sayings, that you warm up to cool down to fall asleep. Okay, so like that's why people will take a bath like an hour or so before bed. It opens up the vasculature, the capillaries, cools the blood off, and helps to cool the core body temperature, that 1 to 3 degrees for you to get to sleep. You need to stay cool to stay asleep. So if you're heating up, you're going to wake up because you warm up to wake up. So you want to keep your body cool. That's why having a cool room is very important, to stay asleep. So knowing the dynamics of temperature can really make a difference too. Did you want to make any comments with the alignment of traditional Chinese medicine when it comes to waking up, in that, 1 to 3 a.m. with the liver or 3 to 5 a.m. with the lungs?
Yeah. Yeah. So in traditional Chinese medicine, they have a clock that says if you wake up at certain times throughout the night, there's going to be different organ systems that are active. And I want to be very clear and specific. They'll talk about liver and they're not talking about a literal liver. It's just the way it was originally translated and the way that it's been carried forward. And so if you're waking up at 3, there's an element of, I believe that is the liver time. So this is very much liver in Chinese medicine translates a lot to stress. So topical situational stress. So this can mean the world around you. It can also mean the world within you, right? Which is why when women are going through that change through menopause, right, the world within them is a little more chaotic and stressful. Or, people who are working all day have something very stressful and their minds are waking up at 3. If you're waking up a little bit after that, right, it often can be related to lung, which is a little bit more grief or immune system. So these aren't, I would highly recommend I'm not doing them service by talking about them in such crass, quick ways. If you're interested in this, I think TCM is probably one of the more powerful medical streams that from the get understood genetics, in the sense of they have words that we didn't have to describe genetics. So to me, it's delightful. But if you're looking for some of that support, let us know. We have a few really good practitioners that practice in the space. And sometimes it's helpful to know if you're patterning, if you're always waking up at a certain time, that might speak to something that needs to be resolved. It's no longer situational. It's something consistent that it's a clue, if you will, a way that you can start digging in. Yeah. So thank you for that opportunity. I love talking about TCM.
Oh, I love it too. And I thought it important to dive a little bit deeper into that question because there were so many people, so many of our audience now who are having that issue. So I wanted to give it a little bit of love and attention.
I love that. No, thanks. And I like that different perspective too, because I think sometimes if, you've gone through I've done the sleep hygiene and I've done this and I've done this and I've done this and I'm still not there, having a clock with which you can kind of say like, oh, well, this time would suggest that. Is there anything going on that is aligned to that? That gives opportunity to explore an issue in a different way, which I think is helpful because sometimes when you're in the middle of stress, in particular chronic stress, it's no longer something you're registering. And so those comments and those questions to pause you and have you reflect, very, very helpful. Yeah. All right. Our next question is from Marlene, and I think she asked this as we were discussing CYP1A2, and so she just wanted a reminder as to what that gene was. So, Dr. Varden, do you want to quickly go over CYP1 Andrew 2? So Marlene, it's 1A2.
Yes, that deals with caffeine metabolism. So the one that she thought we were talking about was actually about vitamin D conversion. So, but the CYP1A2 deals with caffeine metabolism, how quickly or not so quickly you do that.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks. All right, the next question is coming from, and I hope I'm saying this right, Osad. And he is saying that I'm a night owl and my wife is an early morning bird. How do we match our chronotypes? All right, good sir. There's honestly four options, right? And I would say all are possible. And this is kind of where the where you within your marriage with your partner have that conversation and make a joint decision as to what are we going to be doing. So one option is that you both become night owls. And I mean that sincerely. Especially if there's flexibility within schedules, you could both consider that. There's one option that you both consider and you become morning birds, right? You both start to conform to that schedule, and maybe on vacations, right? You flip to the opposite. So those are the first two: choose your adventures, depending on your life, depending on your goals, right? Those might be appropriate. There's another option, right? That means you're doing probably what you're doing now, but you just refine it a little bit. I would imagine, I don't know if this is true, you're probably co-sleeping and there's a little bit of competition insofar as she gets into bed earlier, you wake her up when you get into bed, and then she gets out of bed earlier and she wakes you up when she's getting out. So there could be a refinement of that. How are you doing that? How do you navigate that? Can we tighten windows to be a bit more aligned? Or, and this has become really, really popular, and I think in particular as people are partnering and cohabitating later in life, once they have a lot of established patterns, something called a sleep divorce. And what that means is, assuming you have space within your room or your home, is that a married couple doesn't necessarily sleep in the same bed. Right? Because especially if they have such dramatic differences in sleep schedules, one partner will sleep in one bed, another in a different bed, right? And there's not necessarily that competition. You kind of both get to be the way you are at night, which then affords you to show up better for the person the next day. And so these four options, quite literally, you could do whatever you want. They give you kind of all the combinations thereof, and maybe you guys agree on a matching of, but I would really, really encourage that conversation, because I think if you guys are sleeping better, you as a couple, and then you and whatever life goals you may have together and separately, are going to benefit from that sleep. And I know sleep divorce is very controversial amongst some couples, and it might be something that maybe you just play with, right? It doesn't be, if you make the decision, let's have a sleep divorce, it doesn't mean you have to stay sleep divorced. Maybe you try it for a month and you're like, we both hate it, we want to be together at night. Then you're like, cool, you have to come back to option 1 through 3. So I really encourage people when they're doing this sort of thing, have very frank, open, honest conversation with the client or with your partner. And then remember, you have the ability to go back on your decision if you try something and you both don't like it. So that would be my
And I think
encouragement.
that
Yeah.
there's also the matter of a spectrum within each of those decisions,
Yeah.
that this, there's so much involved in your lives, like even just adjusting routines, you know, um, doing something like, for the early bird, they can delay morning activities if it's with your spouse, to be, adjust it slightly. So
Yeah.
that way it allows those night owls to wake up more naturally,
Hmm.
and vice versa. Or, um, doing something that aligns with, like using the blackout curtains or eye masks. So that way, that allows that person to sleep a little bit longer, or quietness. Or again, there's so many little dials to turn within each of those decisions that you can play with. So
Yeah.
don't just think of it as like, one big decision, that it's, such a discrete decision
Hmm.
itself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, yeah,
yeah.
love that. All right. So Christina is asking if we can speak to the alleles of some of the genes that we've talked about. So just quickly and brief, Christina, and Dr. Varden, hold me honest here because I mix up my letters all the time. Clock, the ideal allele is a T, less ideal is going to be the C. Um, okay. For cry one, ideal is G, and then less than, or no, less ideal is G, correct? Hold me honest.
Uh, yeah, that one I don't use quite as often, because right now
Yeah.
we don't
We'll
have any.
toss that one in the
But
chat
yes,
afterwards. I am pretty
yes.
sure G is the
Let
suboptimal.
me go back and just double check.
Hmm. Yeah, what we can do is we'll toss those into the chat for you, Christina, so that you can see those. And I would also really encourage you to go into your DNA 360 because we've really put a lot of effort into identifying the gene and then speaking to which allele is optimal and suboptimal so that you already have that reference point. It's not us looking it up. Okay. Um, So Greg is asking where can they find the caffeine processing in the DNA 360? We don't yet have it in the DNA 360. It will be released within the app in the coming weeks or months. So if you want to get the app, you'll be able to see that gene and that SNP in there. Okay. So just keep your eyes peeled on the app in your DNA 360 report. Okay. The next question we have is from Marion. I hope I'm saying that right. I feel like that might be a French name. Um, I think this was more when we were talking about caffeine, metabolism. She's saying, I thought green tea had caffeine. Is there a coffee alternative? So to your point, Marion, yes, green tea does have caffeine. And my suggestion of green tea in place of coffee was more one of if you cannot, if coffee is too much in the morning, it's too much caffeine based on your genes, based on your metabolism, then you can consider either a lower caffeine option, which would be green tea, or a no caffeine option. I know there's a lot of what's become very popular of late is mushroom-based coffees. So there's actually no coffee in it. It just has that strong, earthy, lovely taste. It's not a one for one. It doesn't taste like coffee, but it gives you that similar experience to a coffee insofar as a rich, warm drink in the morning. So you have that option of potentially a mushroom or a dandelion coffee in the morning that again gives you that experience, but there is no caffeine in it. So I hope that is helpful to you. Um, Kelly is asking, and Dr. Brennan, this touches on some of your light ideas. What if you're waking up at an hour before the sun comes up? So our super early birds, probably because of a job, we're getting up, sun is a few hours off. Do you have any thoughts as to how can people do some of that light hygiene grounding? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, this goes in the same type of situation with those people waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Your cortisol levels are spiking, yeah, out of pattern. They're spiking a little too early. Normally, they would be spiking around, within 2 hours of waking up. Well, I mean, they start going up, but there's actually a pattern and then they start coming down over the day. So yeah, this is a couple things that I would look at, that I'd be asking a lot of questions, about, blood sugar, about where in your hormone cycle are you, are you perimenopause,
Mhm.
menopausal, again, the way that you would handle what to do really depends on that, on what is causing that. But of course, a lot of times, that waking up, that is that cortisol shift, and things like phosphatidylserine can actually be very helpful in, regulating serotonin level, or cortisol levels. But there again, got to be very careful jumping into supplements, or things like that, depending on the case. So I know that
Yeah.
you have that same.
Yeah, and I think there's a few other strategies for those that have to wake up. It's my alarm clock went off, or I need to get ready and be there for a job, whatever it is. So we're waking up before the sun. A few thoughts. You could, to an extent, see if there's ability within that wake up schedule, especially driving to the office, maybe, of watching the sunrise. That can be very helpful and really stimulate and educate the brain as to what time of day it is. If you're really far off of that, especially for some of our shift workers, you can, and Dr. Varden mentioned this, you can look into artificial suns, right? And those tend to be what they'll call SAD lamps, SAD, seasonal affective disorder. They have that high lux presentation of light, and you can do a little bit of exposure in the morning. I believe it's has to be, if you're sitting in front of a computer, approximately that distance. Read the directions, be very careful of your eyes, make sure you read the directions carefully so as not to burn eyes. But there's other strategies and tools as well if you have kind of an unconventional schedule that can support some of this. And you might want to work with a practitioner to look through different options, be it I'm going to create an artificial day for myself, or I'm going to tether to other signals. So like meal planning, like consistency of getting up, etc. There can be other cues for the body of that. Yeah, and I hope that was helpful. Um, this Brooke actually transitions us very happily into our next question. She says, "How does shift work affect such things? I find switching between shifts harder as I age." Yeah, yeah, Brooke. Like there's an element of, if you're a shift worker, we know it's not ideal for sleep and circadian rhythm, right? And I would also offer it's just tricky. And so I think this is where you want to be working with a provider, right? To really understand how and where we can ground, right? And how do we round off the edges of when you have to go through that shift work? What can we do to be supportive of the body and to compensate for the poor sleep during those periods? I would say that's really a one-to-one answer, and it's not to dismiss you. Listen to some of the tips we've had before, but I more mean to say that as I think it'd have to be a very specific strategy to the type of shift work. Is it I have so many days on, so many days off? Is it I'm consistently the shift work Monday through Friday, but not on the weekends? So many of those variables would go into that planning. So perhaps connecting with a provider, especially understanding some of your genes and the ease with which you can do that would be helpful.
By the way, I just wanted to jump in, so
Please.
it's on the recording, for the Cry1 gene. So there's actually two with different RSID numbers, okay? But generally it's the C allele that is suboptimal for both of those RSIDs. And then the A allele would be optimal in the RSID that ends in 440. The T allele would be optimal that ends in 7161. So just throwing that out there, I don't have on the tip of my brain which one that we do. Maybe that's something if you knew or could.
I don't know the RSID off the top of my head, but in the
So,
app we will put it. Yeah.
yeah. So just know that the C would be suboptimal. So I wanted to get that on the record.
Yeah.
So yeah, what Brooke was talking about, that how shift work affects things, because she's finding that switching between that is very difficult, which actually, because I mean, you beautifully mentioned, a lot of different things, and there's so many people, dedicated people, especially in the medical field, my son being one of them, that does that overnight shift. And I'll tell you, really,
Our cleaners, our cooks,
yeah,
they allow people like me to pretend like I can be awake in the morning. Yeah.
it's we've done actually several webinars speaking about this. I would definitely encourage you to go back and look at some of our other webinars and podcasts and people that we have interviewed that, dive into this a bit more. Got two more questions real quick. Wendy, she said, I have poor BDNF, bought the 3-in-1 Viva Rays, like the ones I have, in an attempt to foster an amber glow to prepare for sleep, finding the orange and red to be really dark. Is this something I can get used to? Yes, actually, it is something you can get used to, but it's also knowing when and how to use them. So making sure that during the day, if you're outside, you don't wear these at all. Okay, I do not wear these if I'm not on the computer. I mean, yes, the sun is shining right now. It is daytime, but I am in front of, screens, blue screens. I've got, a light shining on me. So, these are artificial lights that can affect my cells and my energy. So I wear the yellow during the day when I'm inside. I put the orange ones on after the sun goes down and I am exposed to artificial light. The red ones you only wear an hour before you go to bed. Yes, it is a little strange. Yes, you will get used to it if you wear and use them more consistently. Another thing that you can do is have evening lights, lamps that are red, or a red, one of the red light, frequency spectrum. So that way you're not bumping into things in the evening, but you still have illumination so you can navigate. So these are different ways that that you can deal with that. And I would also wonder how long you've been wearing them, because it does take a little bit of time. And our last
Mary,
question, you want to do that?
yeah, Mary has our last question. So Mary's asking, can you discuss different ways to turn off your brain in the middle of the night? Oh, so I would come at this question different ways insofar as, were you able to fall asleep and you've woken up, or is this brain is preventing actual falling asleep, right? Because I think to a degree that changes the strategy. And I think Dr. Varden's talked through things that would be consistent to both, right? So kind of that 20-minute rule, if you haven't fallen asleep within 20 minutes, get up, get out of your bed. You don't want to be mentally associating your bed with poor sleep. I think I would offer, just especially on the human side of it, because I think Dr. Varden's given really beautiful techniques as to, if you wake up at 3 a.m., here's what you might want to consider doing. I would also offer, especially as you're working towards reducing those 3 a.m. wake ups, I find most people who get that, there's a sense of, I'm not going to swear, but like blank, not again. Like there's such frustration of like, shoot, I've woken up and there's this, oh, why can't I sleep? And there's almost like this self-perpetuating anger inside, right? And that kind of furthers the cortisol or whatever has spurred this wake up. That kind of further shifts your nervous system out of that rest space. So I would say I like the idea of all those things that Dr. Varden listed just a little while ago around what can you be doing during that time when you do wake up, and having a plan, if you will, right? I think as you're working with a provider to really solve for why you're waking up and bringing in those things, right? Waking up and recognizing, okay, this has happened again, right? But I have a plan. This is what I'm going to do. And so it shifts the narrative of, oh, shoot, oh, curse word, I've woken up, and creating that, ooh, right? To more of a, okay, not happy about it, but here's what I can do, and not riling yourself up, right? Because I think one of the most difficult things, one of the things that makes insomnia, amongst other sleep issues, the hardest, is that when you're exhausted, you don't have that grace, and that, like you're frustrated, it sucks. And so it's hard to navigate that experience of, but this sucks, and I want to have a temper tantrum because I haven't slept, and therefore I'm on edge emotionally, right? I think it's creating those soft points of comfort as you're trying to figure out, how do I fall asleep and how do I stay asleep, so that you're not further aggravating that picture. That would be one of my thoughts, I think, in addition to everything that Dr. Varden so brilliantly articulated, finding soft points of comfort so that you are more gentle with yourself through those wake ups, as opposed to kind of creating a very adversarial relationship with yourself. Yeah.
I want to add something in there
Mhm.
is when you're waking up and you can't shut your brain off or turn your brain off, as you're saying, what is it that you're thinking about? Is it the plethora of things that you have to get done the next day, that week? Is it something that you forgot to do, and or is it a insight of brilliance you don't want to forget about, but you're almost kind of like too tired to get up and write it down? Is it, what is it? Because in that, there are techniques that you can utilize to help alleviate that. If it is something like, oh crap, I've got so much to do tomorrow, and have I done this? Before you go to bed, have your list. What I say to my clients is, get the information out of your brain and on paper, so that way you're not worrying about it. You're able to put it aside and allow your brain to rest, because it'll be there when you get up. You don't have to worry about remembering it.
Mm.
Or say, oh, there's this event coming up soon, and you're worried about it. Well, then writing out things that, during the day, you write out things that you're worried about. What's the worst that could happen? How could you change the way you perceive that thing in order for you to better handle it?
Mm.
And, and this type of journaling, this type of thought processing, you're already preparing the mind, so that way it's not being overtaxed to try to work out these issues that then disrupts your sleep. So again, it really depends on what it is that your brain keeps ruminating about, then thinking about ways that you can work with it, because that can unfortunately, like Dr. Krista said, it can perpetuate, and that can actually lead into depression and frustration, and the
Mhm.
mental health side of things that can just exacerbate those issues.
Mm. I love that. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. And I like that where we're leaving off this webinar this evening is on a note of being gentle with yourself and offering yourself that space to be human and to be vulnerable. So Dr. Varden, it has been so absolutely delightful to discuss sleep and all things genie with you. And to our audience, it has been so very delightful to have you here curating the ride, asking your questions and then challenging us with, well, what do you think about this? So we really do encourage you. We send out surveys after these to really ask the question of, what did you like? What didn't you like? What do you want more of? What do you want less of? Because Dr. Varden and I exclusively show up to the service of you to share what we know, to try and help you guys, um, as well as and receive that support. Right? It's mutually beneficial. So please tell us what we can do more of, less of, better of, all the fun things of, and we'll get there. So, Dr. Varden, any parting words before we dance out?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here today, tonight. Dr. Krista, you are just absolutely brilliant. I love working with you, and the
Well, see, madame.
generosity experience, just amazing. And I love so much working with you. And with that, I bid you all a good night sleep.
Yeah. And we dance out because dancing is for mental health. Au revoir, mes amis. Au revoir.